The frozen morning of February 13, 1945, found Reichsführer-SS Heinrich Himmler at his command post for Army Group Vistula in Pomerania, receiving the final radio transmission from Budapest, reporting that German and Hungarian forces defending the city had been destroyed and that organized resistance had ceased. The message marked the end of a 50-day siege that had consumed two German armies attempting to relieve the garrison, had destroyed substantial SS formations that Himmler commanded, and had demonstrated that even Hitler's most powerful subordinate could not reverse military disasters through ideological determination and ruthless discipline alone. Himmler, who had been appointed commander of Army Group Vistula, despite lacking military training or experience commanding field forces, who had assured Hitler that Budapest could be held or relieved through the application of SS will and National Socialist spirit, and who had ordered multiple relief operations that failed with catastrophic casualties, was confronting evidence that military realities could not be overcome through ideological fervor or threats against commanders who reported missions were impossible. The fall of Budapest represented not just a tactical defeat, but a demonstration that Himmler's authority over the SS and police apparatus did not translate into competence at operational command. That political reliability was insufficient qualification for military leadership. That the gap between Nazi ideology's claims and the Wehrmacht's deteriorating capabilities had become unbridgeable. The background to Himmler's involvement with Budapest traced to the October 1944 Soviet offensive that had driven into Hungary and surrounded the capital by late December. Budapest's strategic importance derived from its position on the Danube, its role as a communications center, and its symbolic value as the last major Axis capital still in German hands. Hitler had ordered that Budapest be held at all costs, had designated it a fortress city to be defended regardless of operational situation, and had committed substantial forces to its defense, including significant SS formations. The commitment reflected Hitler's pattern of demanding that positions be held for political and symbolic reasons, even when military logic dictated withdrawal. General Karl Pfeffer-Wildenbruch, commanding the 9th SS Mountain Corps that formed the core of the Budapest garrison, had received orders in late December emphasizing that the city must be held and that no withdrawal was authorized even if Soviet forces completed encirclement. Pfeffer-Wildenbruch understood that being trapped in Budapest by Soviet forces would result in the garrison's eventual destruction, that the defensive value of holding the city did not justify sacrificing the divisions assigned to its defense, and that the operationally sound approach would be withdrawal before encirclement was complete. His objections were overruled, with emphasis that the Führer's orders must be obeyed, and that Budapest's defense was critical to maintaining the German position in Hungary. The December 27th completion of Soviet encirclement of Budapest trapped approximately 100,000 German and Hungarian troops in the city, along with a civilian population of over 800,000. The garrison included substantial SS formations whose presence reflected Nazi leadership's confidence that ideologically motivated troops would fight more effectively than regular Wehrmacht forces. The SS divisions in Budapest represented a significant proportion of remaining elite German formations. Their loss would be felt across the entire Eastern Front. Their commitment to static defense demonstrated the misallocation of mobile forces to missions where their capabilities could not be exploited. SS-Obergruppenführer Karl Pfeffer-Wildenbruch's assessment on December 28 that the garrison possessed supplies for perhaps 4 weeks if rationed strictly, and that relief must arrive within that time frame or breakout must be authorized, received a response from Hitler's headquarters that relief operations were being organized and that the garrison must hold until relieved.
The response provided no timeline, offered no details about forces being committed, and demanded continued resistance without the information needed to plan rationally. The January 1945 relief operations that Himmler ordered demonstrated his approach to military command: massive commitment of forces to achieve objectives that Hitler demanded, regardless of whether operational conditions made success feasible. The first relief attempt, beginning January 1st, involved the 4th SS Panzer Corps under SS-Obergruppenführer Herbert Gille, attacking from the southwest toward Budapest. The operation committed elite SS Panzer divisions, including Totenkopf and Viking, whose loss would be catastrophic, but whose employment reflected Himmler's conviction that SS formations could achieve what Wehrmacht forces could not. The operational planning for the first relief attempt revealed fundamental problems with Himmler's approach to command. Planning occurred in an atmosphere where questioning mission feasibility was characterized as defeatism, where intelligence assessments suggesting Soviet strength exceeded German capabilities were dismissed as pessimism, and where professional military judgments that contradicted what Himmler wanted to hear were rejected. The resulting plan committed forces to attack against Soviet defenses whose strength had not been adequately assessed, along routes whose suitability for armored operations had not been properly reconnoitered, with logistic support that assumed success rather than planning for sustained operations.
Intelligence regarding Soviet forces surrounding Budapest indicated that the Red Army had concentrated multiple armies, totaling hundreds of thousands of troops, specifically to defend against German relief attempts. Soviet command understood that German forces would attempt to break through to Budapest, had positioned armor and artillery to defend likely approach routes, and had prepared defensive positions in depth to prevent breakthrough even if initial lines were penetrated. These preparations meant that any German relief attempt would face prepared defenses by numerically superior forces occupying favorable terrain. SS-Obergruppenführer Herbert Gille, commanding the 4th SS Panzer Corps, received orders from Himmler to break through Soviet forces surrounding Budapest and relieve the garrison regardless of casualties. Gille understood that his corps would be attacking heavily defended Soviet positions, that Soviet forces had concentrated substantial armor and artillery around Budapest specifically to defeat such attempts, and that achieving breakthrough would require overwhelming superiority his corps did not possess. His professional judgment was that the operation had minimal chance of success, but expressing such an assessment risked accusations of defeatism and removal from command. The terrain southwest of Budapest presented additional challenges. The area was crisscrossed by streams and drainage ditches that channeled armored movement into predictable routes where Soviet defensive fire could be concentrated. Winter weather created muddy conditions that reduced mobility, prevented off-road maneuver, and increased mechanical breakdowns. These factors favored the defenders and created obstacles that attacking forces struggled to overcome. The fighting from January 1st to 12th demonstrated both the tactical competence of SS formations and the operational futility of the relief effort. Gille's forces achieved initial penetrations, advanced to within 30 kilometers of Budapest's perimeter, and created hope within the garrison that relief might succeed. However, Soviet reserves committed to blocking the advance outnumbered German forces. Defensive positions channeled German armor into killing zones where massed anti-tank weapons inflicted heavy losses. Soviet counterattacks exploited German overextension and threatened encirclement of the relief force itself. German armor advancing along roads encountered anti-tank positions that destroyed lead vehicles and blocked routes, forcing delays that allowed Soviet forces to reinforce threatened sectors. Infantry supporting the advance suffered heavy casualties from artillery and mortar fire, reducing the effectiveness of combined arms operations.
Units that achieved local breakthroughs often became isolated when Soviet forces closed gaps behind them, forcing them to fight back rather than exploit gains. Logistical problems compounded these difficulties. Fuel consumption exceeded planned rates due to terrain and detours. Ammunition expenditure surpassed expectations because of intense Soviet resistance. Medical services were overwhelmed by casualty levels far beyond planning assumptions. These failures validated concerns raised by professional staff officers during planning, concerns that had been dismissed as defeatism. Despite these realities, Himmler ordered continued efforts. When the first relief attempt failed, preparations for a second began immediately. Operation Konrad III involved transferring additional SS Panzer divisions to Hungary and launching an attack from a different direction. The decision reflected Himmler's refusal to accept that Budapest could not be relieved through conventional operations. SS Brigadeführer Sylvester Stadler, commanding the Hohenstaufen SS Panzer Division, received orders from Himmler to emphasize that Budapest must be relieved and that success would be achieved through SS superiority. Stadler's professional assessment was that the second attempt faced the same fundamental problems: Soviet numerical superiority, prepared defenses, and insufficient German strength. Changing the direction of attack did not alter these realities. The fighting from January 18th to 27th confirmed these concerns. Soviet forces had learned from the first attempt and prepared even stronger defenses. German forces were unable to approach Budapest as closely as before. Advances stalled within days, casualties mounted, and the operation failed. Reports from commanders emphasized that Soviet defenses could not be broken and that losses were unsustainable. Himmler's response combined denial with accusations of insufficient determination. General Maximilian de Angelis, commanding the 2nd Panzer Army, stated directly that relief was impossible with available forces and recommended authorizing a breakout. Himmler dismissed this assessment, attributing failure to defeatism rather than operational reality. Meanwhile, conditions within Budapest deteriorated rapidly. Supplies were exhausted, ammunition was rationed, and food shortages forced troops to slaughter horses for sustenance. Medical supplies were insufficient, and thousands of wounded went untreated. Defensive lines contracted as forces weakened, and the garrison was forced into progressively smaller sectors. Civilians suffered even worse conditions. Starvation, disease, and bombardment claimed thousands of lives. Infrastructure collapsed, creating a humanitarian crisis that mirrored the military disaster.
Communications with German command deteriorated and eventually ceased. Commanders inside Budapest operated with limited information and no coordination with external forces. Repeated requests for breakout authorization were denied. Hitler insisted the city must be held and that relief would come. By early February, morale had collapsed. Soldiers understood that relief had failed and that continued resistance meant certain death or capture. On February 11th, Pfeffer-Wildenbruch authorized a breakout attempt despite Hitler's orders. The decision reflected recognition that destruction was inevitable and that disobedience offered the only chance of survival. The breakout began during the night of February 11th to 12th. Soviet forces quickly detected the movement and brought overwhelming firepower against the escaping columns. Chaos followed. Units became separated, wounded were abandoned, and command structures collapsed. Soviet forces pursued relentlessly, destroying most of the breakout force within hours. Fewer than 800 of approximately 100,000 troops reached German lines. The rest were killed or captured. The final radio transmission from Budapest on February 13th, reporting that organized resistance had ceased and that the garrison had been destroyed, reached Himmler while he was attempting to organize defensive operations along the Oder River. The transmission represented the complete failure of everything Himmler had attempted regarding Budapest. The city had not been held. Relief operations had failed catastrophically. The garrison had been destroyed attempting breakout. SS formations committed to relief had suffered severe casualties without achieving objectives. The failure validated every warning that professional military officers had provided about the operational impossibility of relieving Budapest and the futility of defending the city. The casualties reflected the scale of the disaster. Approximately 70,000 were killed and 30,000 captured within the garrison. Relief operations cost additional tens of thousands of casualties in SS Panzer divisions. Equipment losses included hundreds of tanks and assault guns, thousands of vehicles, and substantial artillery. These were losses Germany could not replace, forces desperately needed for defense elsewhere. The strategic consequences extended far beyond the immediate defeat. The Soviet capture of Budapest opened Hungary to occupation, eliminated German control over Hungarian resources, and positioned Soviet forces for advances toward Vienna and southern Germany. The defeat demonstrated that German defensive capabilities had deteriorated to the point where even fortress cities defended by elite forces could not withstand sustained Soviet assault. Himmler's response combined denial of responsibility with attempts to blame subordinate commanders. He insisted that failure resulted from insufficient determination and disobedience rather than flawed strategy or impossible missions. This ignored the reality that he had ordered the very operations that failed. Discussions at Hitler's headquarters revealed even Hitler's dissatisfaction. He criticized the planning and execution of relief operations and questioned whether Himmler had committed sufficient forces. Though rare, this criticism reflected recognition that Himmler's military leadership had been inadequate. The impact on SS morale was significant. Units that had participated in relief operations understood they had been committed to impossible missions. Their losses had been severe, and their elite status had not translated into success. Professional Wehrmacht commanders concluded that Himmler lacked competence for field command. They noted that operations had been planned without adequate intelligence, that forces were committed without realistic assessment, and that ideological considerations had overridden military judgment. The comparison with professional commanders highlighted the difference. Field Marshal Model's defensive operations preserved combat capability through tactical withdrawals and avoided encirclement. Himmler, by contrast, committed forces to impossible missions, refused withdrawal, and ignored operational reality. His removal from command of Army Group Vistula in March 1945 represented implicit acknowledgement of failure. Official explanations avoided direct criticism, but informed observers understood that Budapest had exposed his inability to command field forces. The disaster permanently damaged Himmler's standing within the Nazi hierarchy. Once considered second only to Hitler, his influence declined sharply. His relationship with Hitler deteriorated, and his authority weakened. The collapse of German defenses in Hungary following Budapest's fall demonstrated the broader consequences. Soviet forces advanced into Austria, captured Vienna, and moved toward southern Germany. Post-war assessments concluded that Budapest operations represented a military disaster of the highest order. Tens of thousands of troops had been sacrificed for no strategic gain. Elite SS formations had been consumed in futile operations. The primary cause identified was Himmler's command.
Failures included inadequate intelligence, unrealistic planning, refusal to withdraw, and repeated commitment to forces to failed strategies. These reflected a lack of military training and the substitution of ideological belief for professional judgment. The conclusion was clear. Budapest became a case study in how not to conduct military operations. Comparisons with professional commanders reinforced this lesson. Skilled leaders maximized defensive potential, preserved forces, and adapted to circumstances. Himmler did none of these. The recognition of failure did not come in a single moment, but developed progressively. Each failed relief attempt, each worsening condition within the city, and the final destruction of the garrison reinforced the reality that ideological determination could not overcome military facts. Though Himmler never publicly admitted failure, his removal from command and declining influence demonstrated that others understood what he would not acknowledge. Budapest exposed his military incompetence. It demonstrated that political reliability could not substitute for operational expertise. The fall of Budapest marked not only the destruction of a city's defenders, but also the collapse of illusions that willpower alone could reverse defeat, that ideology could replace strategy, and that loyalty could compensate for lack of competence. In that frozen February morning of 1945, as the final message from Budapest reached his headquarters, Himmler was forced to confront a reality he could neither deny nor change. The war was lost, and the system he had helped build could no longer sustain itself against the weight of its own failures.